Welcome back to the McCann Dogs Podcast, Season 2, Episode 2, and I am back with instructor Shannon Viljasu. Shannon, I hope I'm saying your last name correctly.
Close enough.
Now, last episode, we talked a little bit about some mistakes that people make when it comes to training their dog, and today's episode is, I think, something that is, we've had some incredible challenges globally over the past year. I know a lot of new people introduced dogs to their household, and there are some common things that we're noticing when it comes to puppy training in this quarantine, with the current pandemic, some new challenges that have arisen. And as dog trainers, we can identify these, that we've noticed a problem with COVID puppy training. And in today's podcast, we need to talk a little bit about what those challenges are and what our listeners can do about them. And I think the first thing, there's a couple different ways I want to approach this, but the first thing that people talk about that we've noticed is dogs being under-socialized. Now, I want to just clarify, and I'm sure you can do it much more eloquently than I can, but the idea of socialization and what that means to us versus what it means to maybe the average dog owner.
Absolutely. The term socialize is often misinterpreted. And basically people assume that socialization means interaction with all sorts of things in the world. So we get a puppy and we head out and we put manners on the back burner and we let them jump all over people because we want them to be friendly with people. So we want them to have a positive association, and we let the manners go out the window when we see other dogs on the street, and we let our puppies just go wild and, lunge towards those dogs in a playful way, but it sets the tone. So if we can define socialization, it is more about allowing the dog to experience and observe the world than forcing the dog to interact or allowing the dog to interact with things. So in most dog trainers, if you ask them, was COVID a good or a bad thing for dog socialization? The overwhelming majority of dog trainers would say COVID was a great thing for socialization because it forced you to stay 6 feet away from whatever that distraction was, which means that instead of rehearsing bad manners as they were learning that person was friendly and nothing bad happened, instead of that, we can rehearse the idea of the dog being exposed to that person and seeing that person from a distance, realizing nothing bad happened, and we can take on the role of bringing the pleasant things to it by, praising the puppy for observing that thing calmly. What a good dog. Or yes, and feeding the puppy for observing that thing calmly, rather than having that situation where it's basically shooting yourself in the foot or taking, a step forward and 2 steps back because yes, your dog has had this experience with a person that has been pleasant but it's been wild. And then a couple months down the road when we're no longer focused on socialization, we start focusing on manners and we realize that we have to do a whole bunch of work to fix the things that just got broken by the socialization process. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle.
Another thing is you're talking about people recognizing some of these challenges with their dogs. I think immediately of the dog owners who are spending more time at home with their dogs and now identify that there's behavior that they don't like. There's even without the going out into the real world and the dogs being under socialized, but this is a great opportunity for dogs to get more training because they really do need it. And, the fact that the owner is home more, they can identify that there's something that their dog's doing that isn't necessarily right or isn't something that they want from their dog. So it's an important moment for that owner to realize that. Now that was a bit of a conversation to go in a different direction, but one thing I noticed with some of our in-class as we've brought students back into our facility with our COVID regulations and restrictions, but we're starting to see people back in, as well as some of our online students who are working with us from all over the world, is some of the dogs, not a lot, but some of the dogs seem a little bit more, not worried is a strong word to use, but they're much more aware of the world around them. And you mentioned earlier about the fact that we're talking about socialization as experiences. We're not talking about interaction. And I think a lot of these dogs have, spent a great majority of their time in their home, in their yard, in situations where they aren't getting experience of the world. And we need to talk about that for our listeners. what are some things they can do to give our dog more experiences so that they, feel more confident and comfortable when they encounter a new thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything and everything that you can think to do to expose your dog safely to the outside world is going to work in your favor. You don't have to go to a busy park to get the benefit of socialization and sit in the thick of things. I will go to busy parks, but I'll frequently just stay in the car. Or I might let my dog out of the car and do some quick response to name right beside the vehicle or some sits. I might just let him observe things at the park for a moment. But as soon as somebody comes close or wants to investigate my puppy, I can easily scoop them up, tuck them back in the crate in the car, and I can save that situation from turning into a situation where there's no manners and there's overwhelmed by the puppy. So I always have sort of a backup plan in mind. And I think that, what we do as dog trainers is usually contrary to what most people will do. And, we'll head out with vests on our dogs that say, do not pet, dog in training. We do our best to sort of keep people from rushing the puppy because we know that that's not good for the puppy and that's not good for our manners. We want to make sure that first off, puppies can get overwhelmed by people very, very easily. Not every single person has a natural way of dealing with a puppy, and some of them will be very overwhelmed very quickly, especially if it's something they're not used to. If it's a child or something like that and they go, puppy, and come blazing in excited, that might be something that scares the puppy. So I like to have something that sort of makes people stop and pause for a moment. I don't generally stop people from being able to say hello to my dog, but I will coach the situation so that I'm not putting my puppy into a situation where they're going to be in over their head. So for example, having that vest on allows me to just have the person pause and they might ask instead of just rushing up to the puppy, which allows me to say, thank you very much for asking. I really appreciate that. We're in training right now, and this is what we're working on. So if you wouldn't mind just standing there and saying hello to me as I make my puppy sit here beside me, that would be the biggest help in the world for me. And generally people, definitely kids, love to help out with that training, but they need the information first. They need to know first that you really don't want them to just rush right up and dive on your puppy.
I love that idea. And we recently published a video on our YouTube channel talking about how it's difficult when you have a dog in training, and people are so excited to see these young dogs and they can't wait to pet them. That we go to great lengths to talk to our YouTube audience about how to deal with that situation. And you mentioned you'll coach them through it. And one of the comments on the YouTube video that somebody sent was something like, I can easily coach someone to maintain their distance, but it's hard to coach them on the tone, on what tones they use and what how bubbly they are, how they speak to the dog. But I'm telling you, this is what makes you different. As a listener to this podcast, this is what makes you different, is that you understand from the first moment that you see that person, your brain goes into coaching mode. You can very easily coach these people. Yeah. Stand up tall. Don't be too exciting, because he really struggles with that. This is the valuable stuff I want you to take away from our YouTube channel, from our podcasts. And these are the little tweaks that you make to your training that are going to help your dog be better. They're going to make you a better trainer for your dog. But stuff like that, coaching someone on how they speak to your dog, that they're not bending over, that they're not too exciting, that's really what unlocks that dog's potential to help them to be successful.
Absolutely. And let me empower some of you right now, because there are going to be people that you run into who say, you're being mean. Oh, you're being too controlling. Oh, the puppy has to say hello. You are well within your rights to smile politely at those people, turn away, and do what is right for your dog. Do not let somebody bully you into thinking that you have to change what you're trying to do in order to accommodate them. You will regret it so much more, because you'll never see that person again, but you'll still have to work with your puppy, and they'll have had that experience and you'll have had that frustration. So I have practiced, because I am not good at those situations, are very hard for me. I'm always smiley. I'm always polite. It's very contrary to my nature to say no, thank you, and walk away from somebody, but I have rehearsed that and practiced it, and I've gotten so much better at being able to say, oh, you know what? Thanks, we're actually not going to greet today, so I appreciate your time, and off we go.
Yeah, I've done the same. We were traveling one time, and I just didn't get a good sense. We'd stopped just off of a highway, and there's a park there, and there was a big fenced area, and we were alone. That's just why we were out with the dogs. And someone came up and they said, as they walked up, we started to, Kayla and I put leashes on our dogs, and we were going to head away. Their dogs had a great great exercise. And the guy said, oh no, it's okay. My dog's friendly. And I said, well, our dogs aren't. This dog isn't our dogs are great with other dogs, but I just didn't get the right sense. Yeah. So I want anyone listening to this podcast, I want you to feel like it's your responsibility to make good choices for your dog and to never feel guilty about saying that I don't want you to greet my dog right now. I don't want them to, however you position that statement, it's about your dog.
Absolutely.
And you're going to be living with them for the next 10, 15, however long years. And, the experiences they have right now can affect them for that long. These are some of the behavioral challenges that we see come in. A dog had one bad experience at the dog park.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, we've sort of taken a bit of a left turn when we're talking about dogs who are under-socialized, but we want you to understand that it's not about interaction. That's not about nose-to-nose interaction. But there is some value there. There is, if you choose the right dog, if you have maybe a friend whose dog that listens really well and you feel like it's a similar size and play style, let's talk a little bit about, how people can do those interactions with an appropriate dog and what an appropriate dog might be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something that you'll have to determine with your dog because every single puppy is going to have a little bit of a different temperament. Some dogs love to crash and bang and wrestle, and, lab puppies come to mind. They will throw each other around like crazy. They really are rough and tumble players. And then there's some dogs that don't really like to interact in terms of physically wrestling. They'd rather run and be chased. There are some dogs that would rather just quietly lay down and hang out with another dog. And if you mismatch all those play styles, you're probably in for a time that's not quite so enjoyable for the youngster especially. So try to find dogs or puppies that match your puppy's play style. And that means that you might have to utilize friends or friends' dogs rather than trying to rely on the strange dog that you see out on the street. I will tell you with 100% certainty, you will very rarely meet a dog trainer who allows their dog to greet strange dogs on the street. It's just far too risky. I've written articles before. You can look up on the McCann dog blog why you should not allow on-leash greetings. We want to be so cautious with our dogs. I've actually written another article called the Trouble with Dog-to-Dog Play, and it talks about how the problem is not the play itself. It's the obsessive nature that we think that our dogs need to interact and play with other dogs. And that, while it may be safe in a lot of situations, there are a lot of situations where it won't be. So you have to ask yourself, is the risk worth it? Because you won't know. You'll be going into that situation blind. And there's lots of people, unfortunately, that are anxious and embarrassed about the fact that their dogs aren't necessarily friendly. And they will tell you that their dogs are friendly and stand there anxious, waiting for their dogs to not be friendly because they know that in these situations, sometimes there is an eruption. So you are so much better off to just say, no, my dog's not friendly. I will often say, sorry, he's just getting over kennel cough. You will never see people turn away faster than if you use the kennel cough excuse. So if you struggle with saying, no, thank you, not today, go for the kennel cough excuse. Let them know that the interaction is not going to happen and carry on your way. And that's going to do a couple of things. Your dog will be exposed to that other dog. They'll see that other dog. They'll note that nothing bad happened. The other thing that's going to happen is you're not going to play into bad manners. So you're not going to reinforce the dog for lunging at the other dog and then ending up getting to greet them, because that becomes the self-rewarding behavior for the dog. As soon as the dog gets to say hello and interact with that other dog, assuming that it's a nice dog and they have, a sniff and it's an enjoyable time, that is a very rewarding thing for the dog. And what happens over time is the dogs will start to see dogs, 20, 30 feet in the distance, and they immediately start assuming that play is going to happen or that interaction is going to happen, and the manners go out the window. So rather than doing that and just being indiscriminate about allowing your dogs to play with any other dogs on the street, assume that every other dog is off limits is a much better tactic to take with your young dog. And then the exception, of course, can be the times where you say, okay, go play. And that can be the interaction with your neighbor who has a really lovely dog, and that the dogs match each other's play style, or a friend with dogs, etc.
And maybe that dog listens if, a situation gets out of hand.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have a whole list of rules that my dogs that have to be met before my dog is able to play with that other dog. And one of them, as you said, is that the other dog has to listen, especially if I have a puppy that I'm working on socializing and I am allowing a little bit of play with other dogs. I need to make sure that I can gain control again in that situation. And if things do go awry, I don't want to have to do that physically. I want the other person, if I'm working with the puppy and I don't have reliable listening skills yet, I I want to make sure that that other dog has reliable listening skills so it can be shut down in an instant as soon as it starts to go south if that happens.
For sure. I know, it can be a challenge trying to pick out the right dog, and it's not something you need to rush into. Shannon mentioned a couple of strategies for working on experience and socialization where, you're working, so many people say something about taking their dog to the dog park to tire them out. And it's just the amount of people that have come in with these outrageous stories about their friendly, happy-go-lucky golden retriever who got walloped at the dog park once and now has, fear aggression or, barks every single time another golden walks by, whatever the situation. There's so much risk, but the best place, I love dog parks for training, as long as you're 150 feet away from them. That sort of experience is good. Teaches your dog to listen when there's those kinds of distractions around. It puts you in a position where you are far enough away that, if things get out of control, you can create more distance. Those dogs are inside the chain link fence, so they can't get out and see your dog. But when it comes to making a decision about choosing another dog that your dog can play with, take those things into account that Shannon just mentioned. Maybe recap the couple of points. The dog listens, similar play style. Was there anything else?
Yeah, similar play style. Make sure that there are similar sizes as well. You can have the friendliest Great Dane in the world, but having a Great Dane that's playing with a Chihuahua could be a recipe for disaster. Even if they're both the sweetest dogs there can be. So a couple of things to be really cautious about.
Now, this podcast is made possible by our Puppy Essentials and our Life Skills, both of our online programs. And we get so many amazing messages, notes, and reviews that come in from our students. And I wanted to share one of them that recently came in. And this, you'll probably hear me smiling. You can hear it, because I can't help but smile when I read some of these things. But I want to read one from one of our Puppy Essentials students. And she says, myself and my puppy Monet loved this course and found all the teaching methods rock solid and all the instructors a joy to watch and listen to. We're still practicing and working through some extra library items, but I can't say enough good things. This course has helped us understand doggy behavior, and the Zoom calls, chat questions have all been so helpful. Thanks for being out there, McCann. So glad we found you. And we want to thank all of our online students for joining us. Now, briefly, our Puppy Essentials and Life Skills program, Puppy Essentials for dogs under 5 months, Life Skills for dogs over 5 months. Just to give me a brief summary about what some of the features are.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you would expect, you'll be learning from online videos when you join the program. But in addition to that, it's not just the videos that will teach you. There's so much help and so much support. In addition to all of the class content, the curriculum, and the actual school for both programs, we meet once a week for live Zoom classes, and we'll talk about different topics. So, we might take a deep dive into nipping in the Puppy Essentials program as an example. We might take a deep dive into working through distractions in the Life Skills program as another example. Every week we'll do a 1-hour Zoom class with everybody. So you get a whole other class with your program. We also have Q&A all through the week. 6 days a week, we have a live Q&A post that everything gets answered within. Our turnaround time is 24 hours as far as what we advertise, but it's usually more like 4 hours. With our email system, it's the same thing. You can email in questions. You can post videos, and we're happy to review those videos and give you tips on things that are going on. Basically, we have so much interaction with our online students. We get to know them so well, and there's no shortage of support for that.
So if you are looking for guidance, help with your puppy or dog over 5 months training, and you'd like help from a professional dog trainer, make sure you check out the link in the show notes below to our Puppy Essentials and our Life Skills program. Now, the next topic that I wanted to talk about when it comes to some of the challenges of COVID puppy training, and this is a pretty common one, and this is becoming more of a concern for people as life returns to normal, as we get back out and people are back maybe at work, or they're able to leave the home more often, and that's separation anxiety. Now, I feel like separation anxiety is a much overused term.
It is.
Maybe we can talk about that briefly.
Yeah, for sure. So puppies will come home, and they have to basically adjust their lives from being around mom and litter mates, which are usually constant for the first 8 or so weeks of their life. And then they come to a situation where they have to be alone. And not necessarily alone, but they have to learn to be independent, right? We use crate training. We use means of teaching them to now be a singular entity rather than a group. And the tactics that they learn with their litter are often are often contrary to what we want them to do. So as an example, the noise that they make in the crate. The majority of dogs will come home, and when we first tuck them in their crate, they're going to whimper and whine. They're going to be a little bit put off. And that's the tactic they're going to use to try to call somebody to them. So basically, they've just spent 8 weeks where they would whimper and whine, and either a litter mate or mom would come and check them out, and they would get their needs met. So whether it's food, whether it's needing to go to the bathroom, mom will stimulate going to the bathroom, things like that. So they have learned to use that noise tactic as a means of getting attention. And when they come into a human world and do that, humans go, oh my gosh, he's terrified to be alone. He's got separation anxiety. And then because we're humans and we just want to fix it, we just want to alleviate the stress from the puppy, we end up doing things that will actually in the long run create more stress. So we will hear that noise and immediately go to the puppy and pull them out instead of going to them. And, the first week or so that I have a puppy home, I will make the crate as pleasant a place as I can by being present. Basically, I carry the puppy crate around with me so that when my puppy is in there, I'll move them into the kitchen and onto the kitchen island. I'm sure there's lots of this in the Euchre puppy videos. Yep. They'll be there with me so that if they do start to fuss a little bit, I can say, hey, you're okay, buddy. No worries. Tuck my fingers through the crate. Usually that's enough for them to go, okay, I'm not isolated. I'm not alone. I'm getting comfortable. And then that first week and a half or 2 weeks, we're also doubling down on efforts to make it a really, really pleasant place to be. So we're feeding meals in there. We're making it very den-like. We're giving them special things that they only get inside of the crate, maybe a Kong with some cheese or some treats stuffed into it so they can work away at that. You can cover the crate, make it a little bit more of a den, make it a really comfortable spot for the dog. And don't think about things in terms of separation anxiety. It's adjustment, and it's them learning how to be a little bit more independent. And that can be a challenging thing, more so for some puppies than others. Some puppies go, okay, no big deal. I don't mind being independent because that's my nature to begin with. And then some puppies will start screaming because that whimpering didn't work to bring mom and litter mates, so I need to get louder and louder. Try not to fall into the habit of thinking that they are out of their mind with stress. A lot of the times it's just tactic, and it's just them trying to use the tactic that they know worked back there. So if we can change that habit, if we can interrupt that screaming, we can basically stave off that pressure and that anxiety that's building in them. So having them follow us around a little bit in terms of where we bring the crate in the home is going to help to bring that comfort level in.
Now, in terms of moving away, because this may create some of the problem, some of the challenge, because we, are going to go from that situation where our puppy is around us all of the time to, a situation, because we talk about the crate so much and because it's such a great management tool, maybe we need to go to the store, maybe we need to go out for the afternoon or something. And the puppy can't go with you. Mm-hmm. So how do you get from that point where your puppy is very near you all the time with a crate and move into a situation where they'll happily go in their crate because you've got to head, away for 4 hours and then come back?
Absolutely. So generally for the first week to a week and a half, I'll carry the puppy around depending on how they act in terms of moving the crate with me. And then once they get to the point where they're happy and content in their crate, now I'm going to start to leave them for periods of time. And I want to do a mixture of both them being sort of more isolated and independent. I might cover the crate in a room that I'm not going to be in for a couple of hours or for a short period of time. There's going to be other times where I want my puppy to be comfortable with lots of motion happening. So I'm also going to practice that. I basically want my dog to understand that when he's in his crate, his job is just to chill out. That's his safe spot. He can chew on his bone or whatever. They can entertain themselves in the crate if they want to, but I'm not going to be paying a huge amount of attention to the puppy. And basically, again, this is a place where you can systematically start to build in duration, where the puppy has to be independent, as well as building the desire to be in the crate and still making it a nice, pleasant place for the dog to be. So we basically want to make sure that our puppies are enjoying the crate, they're learning that it's a safe spot, and they're also learning that it's the spot where they can just chill out. The noise tactics won't work anymore. They basically need to exhibit some manners when we open and close the door, etc., and that is their spot to be.
Yeah, and setting your puppy, we talk so often about setting your dog up or your puppy up to be successful, and this is no different. Doing things like you need to start this process, transitioning your puppy into being comfortable in a crate, independently in a room when you're not around, long before you have to do that, long before you have to leave the house for 4 hours, and because it gives you an opportunity to train it. One of the biggest, mistakes that people make when it comes to crate training is not understanding that it's training. You need to train on this. So
Absolutely.
something that I might do that we've done to set our puppies up to be successful when we're starting to transition them into a crate in a different part of the house is doing some exercise with them before they go into their crate, doing training, stimulating their brain and their body, because they're more likely to be relaxed in that situation. If you have a puppy that you've just made the commitment that you're going to get up 30 minutes earlier than you used to in the morning because you need to make sure all that dog's needs are met before you leave them. And by doing these little things, leaving them in their crate, they're going to be much more relaxed, much more comfortable, and you won't see any of the, you're less likely to see some of these, the symptoms like barking, whining, fussing in the crate when you leave.
Yeah, absolutely. And try to be strategic about this as well. A lot of times what people do is they have that half an hour and they think, okay, I only have half an hour to dedicate to this puppy, and then he's got to be in the crate for 4 or 5 hours while I'm working. So I am going to throw a toy 25,000 times just to exhaust this puppy, and that's going to set me up for great things. And that actually, it's the equivalent of you running a marathon and then trying to go to sleep right after. Right? Your adrenaline is flowing, you're up, you lay there, you toss and you turn, and that's when we get frustration from the puppies. So they end up in a situation where they've got all this energy that's still coursing through them and no outlet for it. So then they start barking, whining, whatever the case may be, and that becomes habitualized. So if you have a short period of time, you can definitely do some physical exercise. They do need to get rid of some of that excitement and some of that pent-up energy, but try to end the session where you are calming. You're taking the energy out of the situation rather than trying to transition from running the marathon to going to sleep right away. So you might do 10 minutes of tug and play work, and then you might do a little bit of trick training, or you might do some training that involves your dog having to be very thoughtful and having to have emotional control, like stays or things like that. And then you can tuck them away in the crate. And because you've gotten rid of some of the mental energy as well as some of the physical energy, you're going to be in a situation where your dog is much more content and they're ready to go in and settle and relax right away. I find that a lot of times people, when trying to get their dogs to sleep through the night, as an example, they'll go about the same tactic, like really rev them up and get lots of physical energy going and then try to get them to sleep. And they end up waking up in the middle of the night because they've still got that unfinished sort of excitement cycle going on in them. So try to keep the energy a little bit lower in the evening. You do mental work and be a little bit strategic about how you're doing your physical work. Think about mental work as the better way to drain things in addition to physical.
When you're starting this process, you're going to be doing it for short periods of time. The last thing, it's no different than a sit stay. I'm not going to practice my first couple of sit stays and leave my dog in that stay for 3, 4, 5 minutes. It's just not reasonable. So you're going to do some of these physical and mental activities, put the puppy in their crate for 15 minutes maybe to start, and then allow them out, and you can do whatever you want to do with them after that. But you do need to start it off in bite-sized segments, and this is why you need to start this process long before you have to leave them for several hours at a time.
Absolutely. And the other thing I really like to do with my puppies is really vary the amount of time that they're in the crate, out of the crate. After that first week and a half where I know that I can easily tuck them in and they'll settle fairly quickly, I will often make sure that there's times where I just tuck them in for 5 minutes. I might specifically tuck them into the crate and go and use the washroom myself and then come back rather than bringing the puppy with me, because that's just another opportunity for them to go in, rehearse calming right away, and then not necessarily have to be able to stay in there for any duration of time. But it gets the practice in of them going in, adjusting to being in the crate, and then adjusting to coming back out again.
Absolutely. Now, another thing that we're starting to notice challenges with the COVID puppy training is people thinking that they've practiced an exercise, doesn't matter what the skill is, and we talk about this a lot, situational learning, but they practice an exercise in their home or in their yard, and then they go to a new place and it's not working. We need to talk a little bit about how situational learning works in a dog's mind and why it's so important with these COVID puppies that they need to get some more experiences and train in some more situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And just remember, with COVID, we're supposed to be staying at home as much as possible. Absolutely. But if you can safely get out, you can safely mask, you're allowed to exercise. You're allowed to exercise and take your dog for a walk. So use that to your advantage. Try not to get stuck in the situation where you're going from that white clean room out to the park right away. We need to still bridge that gap. And your dog can get the benefit of exposure and socialization, as we said, by observing. So if you can go to a spot where there's some distraction in the distance and you can work your sits and downs and stands there, it's going to be so much nicer for helping them acclimate to real world distractions, rather than just working in the house for all these months and months and months that we're supposed to be under stay at home order, and then try to get out and about. Make sure that when you do get out, if you've really had to be stuck at home with your dog, make sure when you do get out, it's little bits at a time. Start in the driveway, start on the front lawn. You might even start in the backyard. Yeah. Do your training in a spot where they're comfortable and they're going to be able to perform in the way that you want, and then start to add in the distractions. And that's especially true if you have a dog that's a little bit softer and you know that chances are they are going to be overwhelmed by the big world, especially because you've spent more time at home. So make sure that you really go about things systematically, adding in the distractions, adding in the different stimulus, little bits at a time, so as not to overwhelm the dog.
I think one of the things that immediately comes to mind is a dog who's doing a great job at home. Maybe the response to name, they'll respond around distraction at 6 feet at home, and then you go to the park and the average person might think, well, I mean, he's doing it at 6 feet. I should try it at 6 feet here. You do need to take a step back in your training. You do need to make things a little bit easier, and maybe we can talk about that stair step sort of approach to training your dog when it comes to new environments.
Yeah, absolutely. Try to think of a scale. So you want to have this nice even scale when it comes to what you're throwing at your dog in terms of what you're asking them to do versus the distractions that you're asking them to contend with. So as you said, if I was starting my walking on lead training in the backyard as an example, I might get to the point where I've got no food in my hand. My dog can hang in heel position as I move and dance around. It might be a thing of beauty in the backyard. But as soon as I get out on the front driveway, it might be a totally different scenario, which means I need to be fair to my dog. It's not that my dog is saying, you know what, I don't feel like listening right now, so I'm not going to. They're at the amusement park. They're overfaced by the distraction. They're so excited by what's going on that they can't possibly come back down to earth and think in terms of that finished product. So I'm going to move out onto the driveway, but now the scale tips, right? The distraction becomes heavier. So I need to do something to balance things out again. I need to make sure that I'm making the task a little bit easier because the distraction is harder. And that's what's going to keep me at the point where my dog learns to listen across all distractions, as opposed to only learning to listen in the house, in the backyard, and then out there in the real world, their minds are just blown by everything.
In our last episode, we talked about value, and one of the common mistakes that people make is not really understanding what's valuable to their dog and not reinforcing that they are valuable in a lot of different situations. And if you haven't heard that episode, make sure you check out it's episode 1 of season 2. But really, maybe in these challenging situations, maybe you are going to the park. Not a bad idea to bring your highest value reward. Not a bad idea to bring something that you know your dog is going to just be over the moon about when they make a good choice, because it's a great way to get back to that 6 foot distance, to get back to that point where your dog was being successful, but really reinforcing that in this environment, that word means the same thing. But when you make a choice here, it's even more valuable to be right.
Absolutely. You might be able to get away with kibble, using kibble in your backyard, and your dog might be pleased as punch to take kibble in the backyard. But out there in the real world, we need to make it worth their while. So that might be where you use little bits of cheese instead of the kibble, so that when you do get good response from the dogs, they go, oh, wow, that worked really well. I loved that. And the value grows for you.
For sure. Now, with these things, these 3 things in mind, I think, everyone who has a puppy right now has gotten a puppy, us included, Kale and I, we have these same challenges. Don't think that you're an atypical or an unusual situation if you are going through some of these struggles. A lot of, so many people say like, oh, geez, you guys make it look so easy. But it's because we as dog trainers have the foresight to know what our dogs are going to find challenging. What's maybe even more important is identifying whatever the problem, whatever the struggle is that our dog has, and knowing that it's a training opportunity rather than some unfixable thing or making some excuse about their breed or the scenario or whatever. But, to be a great trainer for your dog, you need to think like a dog trainer and identify these challenges and record them, as I know you've mentioned before, and take these things on, whether or not it's a pandemic, whether or not you have limited access to whatever distractions. Really you want your puppy to have a well-rounded life, giving them lots of exposure to different things at the appropriate levels. But that's really what's going to be the difference between a dog who is confident and can learn more quickly and a dog who struggles in all of these new environments. But giving them all these new situations, new training challenges is only going to happen when you know what those challenges are.
Definitely. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that we do as dog trainers is we don't let things get to the point where it's really hard to fix. We're facing training head on to begin with, but then in addition to that, when we notice things are starting to slip, which they will, it's absolutely in the nature of every living being that if things are not reinforced enough, they will start to slide. I mean, think about the calculus you learned in high school. You don't retain that information. I wouldn't have a clue at this point in my life because my daily life does not involve calculus that I know of, as far as I can remember. So it's so important with our own dogs. If I call my dog's name and I think, oh, you know what? I had to say that twice before he turned. I'm not happy with that. I'm going to go back to training. Over the next couple of days, I'm going to be doing response to name drills. I'm going to be pulling out my super highest value reward to help build value for that behavior again so that my dog says, oh, right. Listening to my name is a fantastic thing to do. We don't wait until the point where our dogs have ignored their name 20 times and now we're going, it's lost. He's just forgotten what his name is, sort of thing. So absolutely.
And I think, whether you're identifying the fact that you feel like your dog might be under socialized or under experienced, has some sort of separation anxiety or gets anxious when you leave, these are all things that you can work on. These are all opportunities to do some training, whether it's in home with your dog or it's a skill. All of these, and what's great is that when we do podcasts, when we do YouTube videos, we give people some ideas of things that they can do with their dog. And regardless of the activity, all of the things that you do with your dog deepen that relationship. They strengthen that relationship. And what you start to see, if the person's giving them good information, is the dog who's making better choices. And that's ultimately what we want for all of our listeners and our YouTube viewers and for everyone who is a dog owner, because there's a lot of brand new dog owners out there who just had no idea what they were getting into.
Most definitely. And as your lives return to normal, think about the routines that your dog will have to get used to and plan to train for that. And hopefully you don't just have to, get up and go back to work tomorrow. Hopefully you've got a little bit of a transition period where you can help the dog work through. But whatever amount of time you have, just try to get in some repetition and rehearsal of the things that your dog will need to be used to. So as an example, if you've been working at home and your dog's only been crated for, 20 minutes at a time while you shower because you're there with them all day long, now going to putting them in a crate for a 4 or 5 hour window is going to be really, really tough on them. So you'll have to try to make that transition, crate them while you're home over, the coming weeks before you go back to work, crate them while you're home, get them used to the idea that they're going to spend some time being independent. And also think about the routine that you're presenting to your dog as sort of a general routine and keep those things the same. What we don't want to do is we don't want to suddenly change the things that we do because we're going back to work. So while we don't want to make a big deal out of the dog when we're going back to work, as an example, I wouldn't want to, sob over leaving every morning.
I'm so sorry, I'm leaving you in your crate. Yeah.
Because my dog doesn't hear, I feel bad that you're staying home. My dog doesn't hear, I'm going to miss you. My dog hears, my leader is scared. Right. Something is going on. And then that starts to precede you leaving. Right. Which basically means that whole worrisome situation transfers, just like our value transfers, that worry transfers to you leaving, and we actually end up creating separation anxiety. So Try not to make a big deal out of your comings or your goings with your dog, and think about routines that you do when you're home. Don't suddenly change those routines because you're going back to work. For example, if you know you're going back and now all of a sudden you start getting up 20 minutes earlier and taking the dog for a big run in the morning, that will start to signify that you're getting ready to leave. So try to mix things up a little bit. Don't have one specific routine that signifies to the dog that you're going to be leaving for the day.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, if you feel like right now you have a dog who gets anxious when you leave them in their crate, see what are the things that you're doing. Dogs are masters of body language. They're very keenly aware of their environment. That's what's kept them alive for thousands of years, or longer. But these are. See if you can identify what's that trigger. When does my dog start to feel like something is up? And then you can either change that pattern or precede it with something, like maybe giving them a Kong full of something tasty, maybe feeding them their breakfast or whatever before you get to that trigger. It can be a really great way to transition, to bridge that time so that they don't recognize the moment that you're leaving them, and that they have something that satiates them, that they find really rewarding, and you can start to show them that there's no sense in getting worried because something great is going to happen, and you'll very quickly start to see. And this is something that I had to work on with my 2-year-old black lab named Deegan, the dog that brought me to McCann Dogs, is that she started really looking forward to going in her crate. And I hadn't crated her as a puppy. I had made all the wrong choices, and it was a real nightmare. But by, making sure that she had something that was really rewarding to go to, she would choose her crate to the point where I would just leave the door open and she would go, I would just find her in there. I'd find her in there in the middle of the day, and she just found it to be such a great place. But that's because I sort of changed my mindset. And anytime that she was going to be to go in there, I made it really rewarding for her, and I addressed the barking and fussing and noise in her crate. And then when she was quiet, I'd praise her. It really sort of flipped the switch in my brain about how, regardless of whatever the initial response was to being in the crate, about how the dog could really find it valuable if you just showed them why it was valuable. Mm-hmm. And the benefit is now we can go anywhere in the world. She can go to the vet and she can sit in a crate and she's not overly stressed. Yeah. She's had this opportunity. I can know, and I don't need to worry about it anymore, but I can know that my dogs can't make bad choices because they're in a safe place. Mm-hmm. And it's so important, especially when it comes to something like this.
Yeah, most definitely.
And I want to thank you guys for listening. It was a fun conversation we had today, and I think a really important one with all of the students that we see from all over the world. I know there are some really common challenges, whether you're in North America or otherwise with all that's going on. But by giving your puppy great information, it allows you to ease some of those challenges and identify some of the training things that you need to be working on with your dog. If this is your first time here on the podcast, make sure you hit that subscribe or follow button. We try to publish a couple of new podcasts every month. We're just kind of back into things, and maybe we can get ourselves up to a weekly podcast, which would be fun. That's what we were doing previously. But I want to thank you guys for joining us. I want to thank Instructor Shannon for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you guys next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye for now.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the McCann Dogs podcast. And if you'd like some more training resources, be sure to check us out on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at McCann Dogs. And if you'd like to train with us online, be sure to check out the show notes below for our My Dog Can online training program, where we know in just a few weeks your dog will become a well-behaved family member. Until then, happy training.